Hey everybody, welcome back to another 10-minute Marvel video. I'm Petter, and today we're covering one of the rumors that we talked about on this week's episode of the 10-Minute Marvel podcast. Because it was an interesting discussion around the rumored actor, and this is a rumor that Marvel's talked to this actor about playing Professor X. The actor in question is Bryan Cranston. Bryan Cranston, best known as Walter White from Breaking Bad, but has been in a lot of other things as well. And so, as Greg and I were talking about it, we were discussing how much do we actually like this rumored casting? Is this one that would work or not? And we kind of landed a little bit differently. Not that he would have been our first choice for anything, but there was one thing that Greg said that made me come around a little bit to the idea. So I think in terms of a classic Professor X, I'm not interested in Bryan Cranston playing that role. To me, he's an actor who's hit or miss, in that sometimes he's phenomenal, but in some other roles, it's a little bit lacking. And he seems to need the right role created for him to really be able to lean into it, to live into that character. And for a character who's as important as a Professor X to the X-Men, that's a bit harder for me to be like, yeah, this could be amazing, or it could just kind of be a dud. Now, I do think, and I kind of talked about it on the podcast, there is one way around that. And then we'll get to the way that Greg suggested, which I think might even be a little bit more interesting. But the one way around it would be Professor Xavier's in charge of the school. He's in charge of tracking down new mutants, recruiting, and stuff like that, but he doesn't really run a team. He's more of a background character. He might be the character who introduces kind of our point of view character in an X-Men movie. They're like, I've brought so-and-so into the school. I brought Kitty Pryde into the school. I've brought Rogue into the school. Whoever it might be, who's now has to learn how to be an X-Men. So that could work. But then Greg suggested, I think, a better, more interesting idea. I won't say better. I'm going to say more interesting, because it's going to be trickier to pull off. But if it could be pulled off, I think it could be great. And that would be that Bryan Cranston's Charles is a little bit more morally gray. Now, one of the important things about Charles Xavier in the comics is that he rarely ever goes too far. He's always generally the good, humanity and mutants can make it work. We just have to work at it to make it work. But the Krakoa arc within the comics sees him creating this land. Basically, just to dive into and talk about the comics a little bit, Moira has a mutant ability that allows her, when she dies, she kind of goes back in time with the knowledge going forward. So she works with Charles. She works with Charles over and over and over again to try and create a world where mutants and humans can get along. And it never works out. Eventually, out of frustration, Charles creates, and it's basically, I believe it's a living island that is a mutant in and of itself, Krakoa, but that becomes the land where the mutants live. And by creating medicines and other things that humanity needs from mutant abilities, he's basically able to strong arm the United Nations into saying this is its own mutant nation. It is a mutant nation that they can be in charge of themselves. They are completely separate from the rest of the world. Access is only given through these various gates, but they still get to exist. It's kind of this tenuous, peaceful coexistence because it's its own sovereign country, its own sovereign nation. And I like the idea of a Bryan Cranston playing that sort of Charles. This is a Charles who is fed up, who maybe through Secret Wars knows that it doesn't work. Reads the mind of other Charleses across the multiverse, and none of this has worked. And so when the universe is restarted, he just says, it is time to gather the mutants, for us to be separate. We have something that people want, but we're not going to let them get it without saying they're going to leave us alone. Others have tried. Everybody's failed. I'm just going to do something different. And taking that a little bit more gray approach. It is like on Krakoa, it has a ruling council that is going to have different characters like Emma Frost, Magneto, Apocalypse is even on the council. So it is not this pure, like, wholesome Charles-led endeavor. It's this true mutant group that works together, and Charles is fine with it because he doesn't see any other way. So, give Bryan Cranston that role, I'm interested. Give him the same sort of role as Professor X was in the original Fox X-Men stuff, or even like the X-Men 97 X-Men animated show. I'm less interested. I don't know that that gives him what he needs to develop that character. But make it a little bit more of a morally gray character. Doing the right thing for maybe the right reasons. That intrigues me. That I want to see. And just overall, even if Bryan Cranston isn't the person to play Charles Xavier, to have that different take and twist on Xavier from what we've seen already, I think that is way more interesting. Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comment section below. And also, there is a poll ongoing in the community tab for, would you be interested in Bryan Cranston playing Charles Xavier? So go and vote in that, and we'll talk about that on next week's 10-Minute Marvel. If you enjoyed this content, check out the other videos here on the channel, as well as then on YouTube. Click on the channel community tab to vote, but also the podcast tab to check out our full backlog of catalogs. And if you get your podcasts elsewhere, just search for 10-Minute Marvel, and you should be able to find your friendly neighborhood podcast wherever you get them from. But with that, see you next time.